So we're going to cover what is a local plan, the process for this consultation for the Sheffield plan, some of the headlines from part 1 of the plan, talk about allocated sites and what that is and where they are. Part 2 about some of the natural environment topics, and then a bit about how to respond if that's something you'd like to do. So Sheffield's local planning authority, which just to kick off, that excludes the Peak District National Park Authority, part of Sheffield. That's covered by, so the Peak District part of Sheffield is covered by the National Park Authority when it comes to planning matters. So this Sheffield plan will include the rest of Sheffield that's not in the Peak District National Park. And they've published a draft plan for consultation. As Ian said, it's been a long time coming, the Unitary Development Plan from 1998. So this is well overdue. And what Sheffield Council have said is that it sets out the strategy for future growth and change through to 2039 and will help the councils deliver the council's objectives for creating a fairer city for everyone. It addresses needs and opportunities for housing, jobs, important infrastructure, and the basis for safeguarding the environment, adapting to climate change and securing good design. It's one of the most important tools for enabling development and guiding decisions on the future of Sheffield. So it's primarily a planning document, but planning in the broad sense of the term. It's, you know, it's about housing, it's about business spaces, but it's also about planning, you know, infrastructure and other things as well. So it's a strategic document. And it's not the only thing in the council that will help do things like create a fair city. There are other plans and strategies that the council and other partners have for wider working across cities. Although it's called a local plan, it's not a plan for everything. So the local plan, the local planning authorities have to create a local plan in line with the National Planning Policy Framework, NPPF, which is a government document about national planning policy. The local plan sets out the policies for, they say, the strategic planning and making planning decisions, things like travel ambitions, design requirements, and a spatial map showing sites that are allocated, and that's a specific word, allocated, for housing, business use, for housing or business use generally. And then there's other areas might be designated for things like environmental protection. It's just a point on sites that are allocated. Once a site is allocated in the final adopted plan, it's then difficult to change the fact that in principle, sustainable development will likely to be granted at this site if the planning application that then comes in further down the line is in line with any site-specific local national policies and conditions. And that's for the lifetime of the plan, 15 years, unless things, you know, there are reviews, but likely to be so. The reason I raise this now is that if you have an issue with a site that's in this draft plan, that's down has been allocated, now is the time to raise it, not when the planning application comes in, if possible, because this has happened in Rotherham, where the local plan's already been adopted, and some sites were allocated for housing, some farm sites, and the local people aren't happy about it, but they didn't say anything at this point, which makes it then harder to sort of argue later that there should be no housing there. You might be able to argue, you know, on the type of scheme, but not the sort of fact that there would be a scheme in that case. And planning policies and allocations can present both threats when it comes to natural environment, but also opportunities. If the policies are good and the allocations are in the right place, you know, as a wildlife trust, we're not anti-development. You know, we accept that there is going to be development in Sheffield. It's about, you know, good quality development in the right place and make it the best type of development, and also looking about how the plan can deliver for nature and access to nature as well, and green infrastructure, which the NPPF requires. So the NPPF is quite clear, it's not just about housing, it's about a holistic approach to strategic planning. So that's what we're looking for, both the threats and opportunities, so it's the best plan it can be. The Sheffield plan is made up of these following parts. Part 1, which I'll talk about, and part which is, the strategic part, and also talks about areas and allocations. Part 2 is the policies for development management, is the term that's used when a planning application then comes in. Which policies is the case officer assess it by, and obviously the spatial policy, spatial policies come into it as well, but they just split them up this way. I'm not going to be talking about parking guidelines today. I will be talking a bit about site allocations and show you the map. The key diagram, this is the key diagram basically, which shows a sort of general overview of what the council is trying to achieve from a strategic point of view, where the main employment areas in pink, where the main travel routes, where's the green belt, etc. So there's a sort of just an overview, and there's a close-up of the central area there. And just a note to say that the local plan is actually part of the development plan, along with any neighbourhood plans that exist. These are plans that are made at the community level. There might be a parish council or enthusiastic group of local people, Door Village Society and others have done an amazing amount of work that goes into making a neighbourhood plan. And hats off to these areas that have done so. The plan should be complementary. They shouldn't sort of conflict with each other, but the neighbourhood plan might provide a bit more detail and the local people have shaped it, they know the area, so they're really great documents, and they're all available on the council website. And this just shows which parts of Sheffield are covered by those neighbourhood plans. So not all of Sheffield, but not an insignificant area. Also to note, Sheffield Council has a duty to cooperate with its neighbours in South Yorkshire, Sheffield City region, South Yorkshire. There's a new acronym in town, which is YMCA, nearly. It's the South Yorkshire Mayor Combined Authority, and they've got a role to play in strategic South Yorkshire-wide issues. I'll come back to them in later. And there's some documents in the council site about this sort of duty to cooperate. Although a recent letter from Michael Gove to local planning authorities covered a number of things, and one of which was around this area and what they do and don't have to do. Also worth noting, later down the line, local planning authorities can produce supplementary planning documents, or SPDs, that are also policy. They tend to contain more detailed guidance on how to implement some of the sort of top line policies. And they might, sometimes it's a matter of timing. So if the government hasn't produced guidance on something, and in this case, we're waiting for guidance on biodiversity net gain, then when that is available, then the local planning authority can produce some supplementary planning document about how they're going to implement that locally. So they can come at any time within the life of the plan. So the process, this is not actually the beginning of Sheffield's local plan. Been a few sort of, attempts at getting this plan off the ground over the years, but there was an issues and options paper consulted on a couple of years ago, which was really looking at the broad, the broad strategic, where should development happen in Sheffield as a whole. And there were various options were looked at, mostly around should it include any of the green belt, and that there was a public consultation that you may have been involved in that, and the result in it, asked other things as well. The result of that was that, and it was around housing numbers too, has been taken into account in this. There was quite a strong steer from that consultation not to build on the green belt. And that's come through in this draft version. This draft version is actually called the publication pre-submission draft. Some technical language for you there. And it was approved by Sheffield City Council for publication just for Christmas. So we're now in this public consultation period that's up until the 20th of February. I noticed actually today a typo on the blurb for this event, which is my fault, where I put 22nd of February. So please ignore that. It is the 20th of February is when this consultation will close. It's, I think it's 6 weeks, I think. And then what will happen is the draft plan and suggested modifications will be submitted to government in the summer. And then there's to the planning inspector, and then there'll be some public hearing sessions in the autumn. Apparently they will be in person in Sheffield, I've been told. And then the planning inspector will write a report on the plan, and any if there's any clarifications, it may just be taken into account. If there's any what's called main modifications, there'll be another consultation next year on those, and then a final report. And the timetable is it should be adopted by the end of 2024. So it does take a long time, all this. As it goes through that process, it gains more weight, which is another planning term about, you know, when a planning officer is looking at whether to approve or refuse a planning application, different policies and things are given weight, and it's a sort of planning balance. You know, I'm not a qualified planner, but it's what I've learned over the years, and it starts to be, you know, called a material consideration. That's another planning term as it goes through this process, especially if it's had no sort of major objections. It doesn't carry any weight at the moment. So we're still with the old policies. I'm going to come back later about how to respond, but it's worth noting, having this in your mind as we go through, that the council can't fundamentally alter the plan without reconsulting. So it can't suddenly add a load of new sites, for example, without going back in that consultation later. It can propose sort of clarifications, minor amendments with inspect, and then, but it's up to the inspector to consider, you know, consider those really. I did check with the planners that supportive comments are welcome. And the planning inspector will consider those supportive comments as well as any negative ones. Often in these things, people often just put negative comments, but supportive comments are, well, you know, there's some good stuff in there that's worth supporting. Such as I'll come back to the local green space designation. And then the council has prepared these documents based on evidence and analysis, and they say, you know, therefore it's sound. It's something called a soundness test. It complies with, it's legally sound, it's legal, sorry, and it also complies with national policy and other planning regulations. I'll come back to the soundness test at the end. Excuse me, but it just wants to raise it because make the point that this isn't just something that somebody in the council has just written very quickly. It's taken a long time because there's a lot of work that's gone into a lot of evidence behind it. It's not to say there's not comments people make on it, but they've got a lot of evidence behind it. So if you're making a comment you don't agree, it's about saying why you don't agree with what they put or their evidence. Perhaps you've got some different evidence or reasoning for that. And this, you know, it's quite tricky, because obviously planners, this is their job, they do it all the time. They're, you know, they built this up, and they so, you know, as a member of the public, it's quite a challenge to sort of know how to, you know, how to challenge that, but it can be done. I also wanted to flag up that Sheffield Council passed a motion to declare a nature emergency due to a campaign from Nature Recovery Sheffield that we're involved with, and which is great. And in that motion, there's some other words too, but they brought planning into this. Was their words. They said it was important that the council develops robust policies in the local plan to help protect and enhance biodiversity. And that was, supported by all the parties, which was really positive. Now, if you haven't already found it, the consultation is on the council website. You may have had an email about it if you get emails from the council, and it will take you to this web page. And you then get this page probably, and you'll probably have to make a new account, which is different from any other planning portal or council login that you have, because I think apparently it's a different system, possibly to the planning inspector, I'm not sure, but you have to make a register basically. And then when you're in, you get this. I mean, you might want to comment on the bus service in Stocksbridge, but tonight we're talking about draft local plans, so you'd click on that. I'm not supposed to do this now, by the way. You can do this later. I'm just showing you where to find things. And these are the main documents that I've mentioned, and you can open them on screen or you can download them. And there's also a lot of supporting evidence as well, which wasn't very obvious to begin with, but I flagged that up, and the council, credit to them, responded and made the supporting documents a lot easier to find now. So part one, I'm just going to talk about a bit now, some of the headlines from that, which is about, so this is the vision that they've come up with. I can't actually remember now if this was in the issues and options paper, the vision, it might have been. And that's the main vision at top. Underneath there's a sort of whole load of things, including this one about the outdoor city, for example, that a lot that, it's a load of other things in there, but just to give you a highlight of sort of where they're coming from. Now, headline numbers. They plan would cover the building of 35,700 new homes by 2039, which is 2,100 a year. And this is less than the target that the government gave Sheffield a little while ago. But Sheffield actually commissioned their own piece of work and said, actually, we're going to really struggle with that. But we think we can deliver this money. And a letter to local planning authorities recently from Michael Gove has actually now said that those targets are more advisory. So I think that, we forget the 52,000, to be honest. And most of the development areas are going to be in the existing built up areas, particularly around the central area, but also in Stocksbridge, Chapeltown, High Green, and quite a bit in the east and southeast. That's where most of the development is focused. It's also around raising densities. And it does avoid the green belt, except for one site in Norton in S8, which is a previously developed aerodrome. So it seems quite a sensible approach, to be honest. We're not a green belt charity, but the overall approach seems quite sensible. And it talks about supporting 20-minute neighbourhoods. And climate change and flood risk management are feature up front in the strategic priorities. They want to locate growth where it avoids harm, enhances Sheffield's distinctive environmental assets and green infrastructure, and mitigate any adverse environmental impacts, and avoid areas like public flooding. And I think rethinks the trust, that's really important as well. That does present the council with a challenge, all these, because Sheffield is geographically constrained by its geography and by the green belt and the national park and everything. There's also a whole load of spare space to put 35,000 houses plus employment sites. So I think the planners have had a bit of job on their hands, and just to sort of recognize that's not easy. This is just the vision document, the vision that they've got. with the aims, the 8 aims around it. So I'm going to be mainly focusing on the things around the green city. But, you know, if you're interested in stuff, do have a look at all the whole document as well. There's also things about environmentally sustainable city, about net zero, and I'm not going to talk a lot about climate change because other people are doing that. Sheffield Climate Alliance have an event, I believe, on Tuesday. So if you want to know more about that, please look up South Yorkshire Climate Alliance and have a look at their events and join that as well. I'm not quite sure about this making efficient use of natural resources, but I'm not quite sure what they mean by that. But you know, we'd like to see more natural resources helping Sheffield and being in Sheffield. But anyway, they've got that in some of their targets. Now, some of the headline objectives for a green city. They put these. Where I've put some text in blue, that's just where I've just highlighted it and where I might perhaps make some suggested changes, which may or may not be taken into account. We'll have to see. Safeguard and enhance Sheffield's unique natural landscape, protect and enhance biodiversity. I'm just not a massive fan of the word enhance because to me it's a bit vague what it means. So I'd like to see stronger wording there. So I suggest my suggestion at the minute, I'd just say all these suggestions I'm making tonight are draft suggestions. We haven't actually written our response yet. We're shaping it. We're open to hear back from you and from other people. But this is our current thinking, and just to say, so could be subject to change. I'd like to see, you know, about restoration of nature. We know that we need to restore nature in Sheffield, and this document and the planning system is one opportunity to do that. It's not the only opportunity, but we want to see, you know, the restoration of nature being referred to, not just safeguarding what we've got and making it better, but having more of it as well. So we think it could be strengthened. Definitely, yes, protecting what we've got, and then but measurably contributing to nature recovery. That would be much stronger wording. Love to get that in if we can. And also note on climate change, because it talks about Sheffield's unique landscape setting, mitigating climate change. What did it say? Yeah, in order to mitigate climate change, but actually the natural environment does help to mitigate climate change through carbon sequestration, etc. But it also helps with climate change adaptation with things like reducing temperatures, holding back water, and adapting to the climate change that's inevitably going to happen. So it'd be good to recognise the role the natural environment plays in that as well. Okay, so there's a policy called SP1, which is the overall growth plan. There's a whole load of stuff in there. I've just picked out L, which is that Sheffield plan will deliver, it says, the protection, management, enhancement of designated blue and green infrastructure sites and assets. With the focus on this is their words, green network, including the local nature recovery network, and designated urban green space zones. Now, to be honest, I think this is the biggest issue, if you want to call it that, I have with the draft plan. It's this bit about the green network, and that it says the green network includes the local nature recovery network. And then it says definition green network, see map 17. And this is map 17. And to me, this isn't a green network, and it definitely doesn't include a local nature recovery network. It just shows sites that are designated for wildlife and urban green space zones, which are parks and other green spaces. There's no network, there's no potential networks, no opportunity sites, or connections, or buffering, or ecological networks. So I think this is, we need to work on the words here and also the maps. And I have spoken to planners about this. And one of the reasons for this is because the local nature recovery network is being developed, but at the South Yorkshire level, with the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority, which is all the local authorities in South Yorkshire, but it's not quite sort of finished and publicly available yet, so they couldn't include it at this point. So that's just, you know, one of the reasons that it's nearly there. But so what I'm going to suggest is they excuse me, they make it, and they separate out the green infrastructure map and policies slightly from the local nature recovery network, because there's slightly different things. Green infrastructure can include other things like, you know, cycleways and other things that isn't really about nature recovery, but it's green infrastructure. And also, as I say, that map doesn't include where there could be new green infrastructure as well. So I think I'd like that to be a bit clearer, that is actually a blue and green infrastructure map, and they can add some opportunity sites as well. Green infrastructure network, because it's not really a network at the minute, and then have a separate plan, a map and policy around the local nature recovery network, and that would be linked to local nature recovery strategy that's being also developed at South Yorkshire level. And if Sheffield do a nature emergency action plan as per the motion they pass, linked to that as well. It's partly a matter of timing, but also we need to be really clear that they're slightly separate but related plans. So it's a bit technical, but I just think that's quite important, especially at the strategic level. I don't expect you to read this. I just said earlier we have to justify why you're making suggestions. The National Planning Policy Framework says that plans should include things like wildlife corridors and stepping stones, areas for enhanced restoration and creation. And that map 17 doesn't include those things at the minute. It doesn't include the priority habitats and species and so on. So yeah, so that's the justification. We're going to put our draft response on our website, so you don't feel you need to sort of scribble all this down or anything. Now, the next thing to look at is the sub areas. So they've split Sheffield into these areas, and each sub area has some policies and maps associated with it. So what you might want to do is go away and look at your own sub area if you're interested in your local area. Only you might be interested citywide, I don't know, but many people are interested in their area. And it'll have a load of information about the area. I haven't put it all up, just pulled out an example sub area policy for the southeast of Sheffield. So it's got a whole load of supporting text about why the policy is here and what they want to see in this area. It covers obviously all sorts of things. I just wanted to highlight this one in particular, which is to designate a local green space at Althorpe Fields. And this is something we're really supportive of. We're going to definitely put in a supportive comment for this. And Althorpe Fields Action Group put this application in themselves, and they did an amazing job. And because the only time you can get a local green space designated is at the local plan making stage, and it's come from the community, done a brilliant job, and the council are really supportive. They're cancelling the land, so it's, you know, it's likely to go ahead, and it would give it equivalent protection to the green belt, so you might want to support that. Similarly, in South Sheffield, the Bullhill Woods, Friends of Bullhill Woods, put in another amazing local green space application, which again, I've seen a fantastic piece of work. The planners are really impressed by it. But you might want to support that designation, and that is privately, and so possibly could be slightly more contested than the Althorpe one. So please give them your support if you are putting in a response, especially if you live in that area, obviously, and you use that area, because then you could give justification for that. Now, there's a policy of interest to us around blue and green infrastructure. This is what I talked about before, but it's green network. It isn't really a green network map. Yeah, so we just need to be a bit clearer about what we're talking about here. Are we talking about the parks, or are we talking about nature cover networks? Or so we've just got some suggestions to make about, again, making that clarity between the blue and green infrastructure and the nature recovery network. So our suggestions are in green at the minute, our draft suggestions. And also, again, want to see more green infrastructure. Now, the maps, in a minute, I'm going to show you the map online if you haven't seen it. It's an interactive map, so I'll bring it up shortly. On there, you've got the site allocations, and for each allocated site, there are supporting documents such as Sheffield Housing and Economic Land Availability Assessment, things like that. The maps are also available in PDF form if you prefer. Just to give an example, this is just a site, I haven't picked this for a particular reason. It's just a housing site, and it'll show you on the map, you'll be able to see the other layers. I'll show that in a minute. But in the Appendix A, it's got all the sites and a bit about the site, what they want to do there. Is it homes? Is it employment? Are there any conditions on the development? You can also click on it to take you straight to that site on the map, and click to see the detailed site appraisal. If you do look at any sites on the map, you might also want to look at satellite view as well. That can be quite helpful. On the site appraisal, if you do click on that, it will show you how the council assess the site. You know, obviously they've got to take into account a whole load of things, all these things, and they sort of score them. You know, yes, it's going to be great for this thing, double yes, yes a bit, neutral yellow, not very good for this thing, no red. That's a bit of a red flag. I'll have a look at that. What I'm not quite sure is how many sort of greens you need for it to be allocated, or how many reds for it to not be. I know that quite a lot of sites were ruled out because they were too red, if you like. If you do have any issues with sites, it might be worth digging into this and seeing whether you agree with the yeses and nos, or if you've got any evidence to the contrary that you can supply to back up your case. Just to note, Smithy Wood, ancient woodlands near the M1, which is a site, if you're members of ours or long-term supporters, you'll know that we fought very hard to protect from development, because there was an application to turn it into a motorway service station a few years ago now. That is not allocated for development, so we're really happy about that. Hepworth site in the Loxley Valley, where a planning application came in maybe 3 years ago now, I can't remember now, for a development in that valley, and quite some of you perhaps here tonight were involved in objecting to that. That is not allocated for development either. And so it's worth looking at what's not allocated as well. You can probably support that. We've been through the list of sites and the maps. Might have another look through. We've had an initial look through. There's quite a lot of sites to look through. There's no glaring for us, like, oh my word, why on earth have you allocated this amazing site for wildlife? There's no massive showstoppers for us, as it were. There are some sites we have a bit of concern about, but it's probably tweaking the allocation. So some of them have, or the condition, some of them have a portion of local wildlife site within their red line boundary for some reason. And we're a bit concerned about that, because local wildlife sites are only protected by planning policies and decisions, not by law. And although the development might not take up 100% of the red line area, there's usually conditions protecting that local wildlife site, and policies biodiversity net gain would steer development away, still think it's our view that it'd be better if the red line did not include any local wildlife site. It's be more protected that way. So we'll be asking for that. We've spotted that so far on 4 sites, and we'll definitely be submitting comments along those lines. Some of them have a condition around a buffer to local wildlife site. A buffer for local wildlife site is a good thing, and but when we've gone through, that's not always consistent for all the sites. So again, we'll be flagging up those where perhaps there should be a buffer, but there isn't. Here's just an example of that. Parkwood Springs. This is the former ski village, and actually all the green hatched area is designated as local wildlife site, and quite a bit actually in this case is within the red line band, or blue line it shows us here. That's not even mentioned on the site description, and the whole site's down as employable area. So that's one that perhaps we're going to perhaps the most concerned about. There's another couple. So the Mosborough area, which includes a bit of local wildlife site. And it does, in the conditions, it does say it needs to be buffered, and you know, it should be in the areas in the local nature recovery strategy shouldn't be included. So that's all good in theory, but you know, we want to make sure that these policies, when it actually comes under planning application, what actually happens on the ground, that sites that should be protected are protected. Probably the safest way is if it's not on the red line at all of the allocated area. Right, I'm just going to pause for a minute because I've done a lot of talking. There's a lot of words, I'm afraid, and show you the map, which means you're getting a different screen up. So I hope you're all still awake. Follow, it's quite a lot to follow. Ian, can you see that map?
Yeah.
Right, so this is the map that's available from the website, and it's interactive, so you can zoom in and out and find your area of interest. You can see there's a lot of, this is a GIS, which is Geographical Information System, and they have layers of data on top of each other. You can, over on the left, you can show what some of these areas are by clicking on the arrows, and you can get rid of some layers if you wanted to. I'm just randomly clicking things, but actually, no, just boundaries. Let me, it's got like travel routes. So if you're finding them a bit distracting, you can turn them off. That's better. Let's get rid of the transport just for a minute. You might want to look at other designations. So, you know, you've got everything on here as well. Obviously, we would quite like having things like the local wildlife sites showing, but you can switch things on and off. And policy zone, that's, you know, you probably need that on to know what you're looking at. As I say, you can click through from the documents, will take you exactly to one site if you're interested in this site, or you can sort of cruise around the map and click on a site with a boundary to see what it is. So I've just randomly selected this site in Darnall, and it comes up, it's site ES20. It's down as a mixed use site, so that'd be not just housing or not just business, it could be mixed use. And it says how big it is, maybe a portion of that could be for housing, for 80 houses, and a portion for employment, and a portion perhaps for you know, open space or something else. So you can have a look around the map at your leisure, and zoom in and out and have a bit of a play. particularly in the area that you know, and have a good look at what's going on. So what's this one? Work now, is it? You've also got a key here as well, telling you what all the colours are. So that's very helpful, obviously. It's not showing me that one. No, don't know why that's not showing up now. Anyway, so you get the idea. Let's just try this one. No. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm doing something wrong now. This is where we need somebody from the council to tell me what I'm doing wrong. Anyway, you can have a play with that and say, if you can't find what you want this way, you can find the site in Annex 1, A, and click through that way. So I'm going to close that again. And just take a drink of water. For part two is shorter. That was a check-in. Ian, can you see my screen again?
Yeah, sorry, I was on another screen myself.
That's all right. So part 2 I mentioned are the policies, development management policy and implementation. And there's a whole chunk, chapter 8 on the green city responding to biodiversity emergencies. So that's mainly what I'm going to focus on. All this introductory words, that's all very helpful. We've only got minor amendments to suggest about some of these words. Now, this is quite interesting. Just to flag this up, it's about what they're calling urban green space zones. And they're saying in their glossary that they're predominantly green and open areas within the main urban areas and larger villages in the green belt. They cover a range of public and private areas, parks, etc. And they're shown on the policies map. So on that policies map I just showed you, urban green space zones is one of those layers. And actually, though, this is quite interesting. I've highlighted it. It's saying that only urban green space zones of 0.4 hectares and above are shown on the policies map, and 0.2 of a hectare in the city centre, because that's more zoomed in. But the policy GS1 applies to the smaller green spaces as well. So it actually seems to apply to all green spaces apart from private gardens. So I think that's actually, pretty strong in terms of protection for green spaces, because it talks about not resulting in the loss of open space unless these things are fulfilled, really. So yeah, I think that's quite good. So I think overall the plan's quite good for protection. I think it's just weaker on new green infrastructure, new spaces for nature, and connecting those up. There's also related to that is an open space policy, and this is in the thriving neighbourhoods bit, and about if you've got 100 houses or more, 10% of sites should be laid out open space. There are, exceptions. There is a whole open space sort of evidence document I only found yesterday, so I haven't managed to digest it fully, to be honest, but it talks about what is open space. Now, it includes accessible natural green space, which is something we're particularly interested in. We want, good access to nature for all the people of Sheffield. And what I did pick up yesterday is it's for accessible natural green space. It's used the accessible natural green space standards, which are government standards for natural England, but it's also sort of introduced its own standards. So I'm not quite sure what we think about this yet, because I haven't got fully time to digest it. So when I looked into this open spaces assessment document, which is in the supporting evidence, basically the plan at the minute, or Sheffield, not the plan, Sheffield doesn't meet the accessible natural green space standards recommendations from Natural England. There's a series of maps, this is just one of them. One of the green space standards is that of at least that everyone, wherever they live, should have access to accessible natural green space of at least 2 hectares in size, no more than 300 meters walk from their house, 5 minutes walk. But actually only these bits in brown meet that standard. So there's quite a lot of gaps. So what these consultants have done is sort of introduced another locally derived access standard, which is 15 minutes walk to a smaller size, 0.15 hectares, as well as the ANC standards. Though I'm not quite sure, but might need to think about that, whether they're just, you know, where that sort of come from a bit more. It's worth saying what accessible natural green space means. It does mean spaces with definitive boundary and public access, so not the open countryside, which is why all this greenbelt bit on the left isn't included when you might think it should be included. But what's clear is whatever measure you use, there are still gaps, particularly in the city centre, and some recent research by the University of Sheffield, Paul Brindley, is also highlighted the city centre is pretty low on green space, and also, as you see, some other parts of Sheffield. There's also a piece of work in the maps I refer to, the South Yorkshire natural capital maps, as well as the nature recovery network. There's also a layer showing access to nature capacity and demand map, which hasn't been referred to, so we want that to be taken into account as well, because often the demand for accessible green space is different to where the accessible green space is. And if we're levelling up the city, you know, we want everybody to have good access to good quality green space. So the question really is, how these gaps be addressed? It's not that clear at the minute. There's also policy around development biodiversity. It's got some good supporting text around protected sites, and it does refer to the South Yorkshire Local Nature Recovery Strategy and the Nature Recovery Network, which is great. It says that becoming supplementary planning document. If the map's ready before that, then it could be submitted to government. It just depends a bit on timing. Just need to be a bit clearer about that. And this is the actual policy. I don't expect you to read all that, but it's basically saying designated sites will be protected, so that's good. Just to highlight a couple of things around species. I know some of you here tonight have come because you're interested in particular species. I think that perhaps this wording could be a bit stronger, a bit more specific, so that might be something you might want to put if you're going to respond. For example, instead of preventing the loss of species, we could be a bit more positive about enhancements for protection recovery of priority species, such as, you know, maybe new dwellings must include things like the swift bricks and the bird roosting opportunities, bat bricks, and that sort of thing. I know there's, you know, petition to council about that recently, and that, you know, the swift people here tonight probably want to do some comments about that. It's also something we've noticed over the years, riparian developments often don't think about species. Actually, quite some of the riparian developments have good buffer, but if they don't, they, you know, need to really think about species, and some justification around that. So that's something to think about as well, species. And in this design features to enhance biodiversity, we think there could be a bit of a stronger, a sort of a bit bigger list there. You know, brown green roofs, street trees, etc., swifts, bat boxes. Again, this is quite a lot of words, but basically there's a biodiversity net gain policy. That biodiversity net gain is a whole big other technical topic that I could do another wild night in on, and that needs another good amount of time. So I won't go into it all tonight, but just to say, I think the policy is pretty good. I'm going to have another look through all these policies. So to say these are my draft views. I was just going to suggest something around something that does happen sometimes, which is site clearance before a baseline ecological assessment is carried out. So we don't want to have a site being cleared and then they get the ecologists and see what's there. And the Environment Act has picked that up as something that basically is, people effectively penalised for, which is great. But I think it needs to be in here as well, because not all developers are going to be reading the Environment Act. So by the time they get the ecologist in, who would advise them, it might be too late. So that's the only thing I'd really add. Otherwise, I think that's probably okay. But so I won't go into that. There's a policy around trees, woodlands and hedgerows. I am checking with my trees colleagues and street tree partnership which I sit on, looking at this, and my woodland colleagues are looking at it. So I haven't really got a lot to say about this at the minute, but I think I should refer to good practice. So we'll probably bring some of that in. But you can have a look at that. It's GS7. It's about retaining trees and planting trees as well. Seeing what you think, because some of you have obviously been involved with things like street tree protests and that kind of thing. So you might have a view on that. At first glance, it looks okay, but I think there's more places where street trees could be throughout the plan. These are some other policies you might be interested in looking at. Green roofs are in there, for example, which is good. So just to summarize our top asks, so we're still working on the exact wording and we'll probably have another look through everything. There's a lot of information to digest and some of it's only come out quite recently. It's not the only thing we've been looking at, so it's a matter of time when we can read all the information, digest it fully. Go away and check your local area, the allocations, etc. Considering support local green space designations. We'd definitely like the wording around low objectives for Green City, strengthening and particularly SBD 1 around the distinction between the green infrastructure, local nature recovery network, and again in BG 1 and about where's the spaces for nature going to be to create the ecological networks, where's going to be more green infrastructure, and again that all contributes to the climate crisis as well as nature crisis. You talked about species and access to nature as well. So I think it's about being a bit more, can we be more ambitious with the policies and the strategic plans to make sure that the words at the beginning say actually feed right through in all the way through the plan to deliver on the ground. And it's really clear for people, really clear for developers as well. So just again about how to respond, showed you this slide before, go to the web page. You'll have this page when you get in, and then if you scroll down, you'll get this page. This is all the supporting documents I mentioned. There's under each file, there's a whole load of documents. I haven't read them all. There's a lot there. And then at the bottom, it says make a representation. And this is the email address, by the way, if you've got any queries. It's sheffieldplan@sheffield.gov.uk. Ian, perhaps you could pop that in the chat as well. sheffieldplan@sheffield.gov.uk. If you click on make a representation, you'll get this page. Just want to know who you are. And then you have to comment on each bit of the plan so that it works by drop-down list. So you might want to write your comments on a Word document or something and then paste them in later in one hit. You can save it, but it just might be easier for you. Or for example, if you want to make a comment on an allocated site, you choose Annex A, which bit of Sheffield is it in, which site. whether it's a site or a policy, it then takes you to this page. It's just a bit scary looking, to be honest, because it says, do you think it's legally compliant? And you're like, oh, I don't know, I'm not a lawyer. You know, I think this is around the sort of habitats assessment and the sustainability assessment. I think it talks about that on the website and the supporting documents. I think it's more about, is it sound? And this is where policies come in, like the national planning policy or other policies or good practice. So you'd probably tick yes, no, yes, probably. And then you need to say why you don't think it was, why it is, and really helpful if you could make some alternative suggestions, which is what I've tried to do as I go along, rather than just say, I don't like this, what would you like to see? And then it asks you again, also a bit scary, would you like to be involved in the public examination? This is not signing you up, it's just an indication. So, you know, does it quite, I think for a member of the public, this is a bit like, whoa, but I think they have to go, they have to do it this way. And, you know, the planners are available to talk to about this. This soundness test I mentioned, this has come from the National Planning Policy Framework. This is what the council's attempted to do. So it's probably this D that, you know, you could use if you've got any comments on what we'll be focusing on. The council have had drop-in events, and they are turning up at local area committees, LACs. These are the remaining drop-in events, so please talk to them if you have questions, or go to your LAC if you haven't, if it wasn't like last week or something. The dates are on the council webpage, or if you sign up for emails from the council, you get them. So, and as I say, as we go along, we'll be putting information on our webpage. We'll send an email. If you sign up to get emails from us, we will be sending out an email. If you haven't signed up to get emails from us, you might need to. Otherwise, we probably don't have permission to email you. So you'll have to just keep checking our email or follow our social media. So I'm going to stop there. So it is quite a lot to say. I can see there's a whole load of questions. So I'm going to close the screen. Just a final mention. Oh, that's our email address, by the way. In the planning team, it's just myself and Ian, and we do a whole load of other stuff, not just planning. And we are a charity, so we do rely on support for this work. This type of work is particularly difficult to get grant funding for. So thank you to any members here tonight. Thank you to those who've donated to join tonight. And if you haven't joined and you'd like to join, please consider doing so as a member and support this work. If you want to make a one-off donation to our campaign fund, we'll also put that link in the chat. So thank you for supporting us.